We're back for an exciting Instagram Live today. It is Oregon Wine Month. It's May, celebrating all things Oregon. Some gorgeous wines being produced out of the Willamette Valley. I can't wait to get back there and taste. And we're going to be trying a really exciting newer producer out of the Willamette Valley. I've been impressed with these wines. They're very Burgundian, stylistically, a lot of good acid, earthy tones. We're talking about Bells Up today. We're going to be tasting with their winemaker, Dave Specter, and we're just going to go live with him now. Wait to catch up with Dave. I've known he and his wife for many years, and they're doing some really great things. So I'm excited to chat with him. So see if we can get him on here. Okay. Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. We're going to be tasting two of their wines today. So we have their Rosé wine from the 2020 vintage. Probably not the easiest vintage to make rosé, but this is a very beautiful bottling. They do a great job with that. And we also have a new wine from the 19 vintage, which I think has not been released yet, Seyval Mountain. It's from their estate. It's a brand new wine. I'm excited to taste that with Dave. Let's see if we can try this again and get him on. Okay. I'm just going to pour a little bit of rosé. Okay. So Dave, if you're by the Wi-Fi, it's best to get really close to the Wi-Fi. It says you're not able to join right now, so let's hopefully get you on here. Yeah, so we have the 2020 Prelude. So with Seyval Mountains bottling. Really pretty color, kind of hard to see in here, but it's got kind of a, I don't know, a brownish tinge. Love the nose. It's so delightfully earthy, almost kind of in a big table kind of way. Texturally, this wine is really beautiful too. We'll try this again. Hopefully this will work. Had some issues lately with Instagram connections, so.
Ah, there we go.
Oh. You may have to go to your cellular connection.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Having all sorts of technical issues up here.
Hey, no, I mean, it's like the Willamette Valley, right? There's no cell signal, internet.
Yeah, it's part of our charm out here. So we just try to make this work. And I was Sarah wanted me to sit outside originally, where it was all pretty and everything. But I don't know either. Well, anyway, I'm just glad we figured it out now.
Yeah, I know. Really, I don't know why, but for this platform, it's really touchy. So the closer you get to Wi-Fi, the better.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I guess we go, kind of substance over style here. Yeah. Ben, man.
Exactly.
It's been a crazy year, right?
Yeah, it's been a ride. What can I tell you? I mean, this last year has really just been more than anything about just trying to figure out how to make things work. We're a very, very small producer, and, normally in a year we'll get, as we get into the summer, we'll have a lot of out-of-town travelers come in. And, last year we just saw, I think we saw probably 20% of the people we normally do. But, what we're very fortunate about is that, because we're so small and because the way we normally run our tastings is we only have one group in at a time, and I'm the one leading most of them. So not many people are doing direct winemaker tastings anymore. So you're really getting an opportunity to make connections with folks when they're here. And that really helped us quite a bit last year. I mean, because we could really have those great talks with our customers about kind of how things were going in our life and all the craziness of homeschooling and just kind of trying to make it through this pandemic thing, and then kind of the same thing on their side. And you really feel like your customers and your club members are some of the best friends that you have. So it really helps you in times like that to kind of just make it through and hopefully get into the end of this thing. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, man, it's definitely been a crazy year, and not only on top of the pandemic, of course, you guys were hit with some crazy weather, dealing with problems during harvest in the Willamette Valley, really up and down the West Coast. People were hit. It's just so sad and unfortunate that on top of kind of what you're saying, traffic being down at the wineries, you have to deal with this this crap with you know, a very challenging harvest.
Yeah, the smoke definitely made life interesting, as if it weren't interesting enough. You know, we've been saying it's such a 2020 way to end last year. You know, the nearest fire to us was about 2 miles northwest and up at the top of the mountain that we're on. And if the winds had been blowing in a different direction, it was going to be a really, really rough time. But fortunately, we were fortunate, not to have to evacuate. We actually were able to host another family, friends of our daughters, for about a week. The firefighters did an unbelievable job of knocking it out before it could really spread greater than it already had. And then as we look at our 2020 vintage, you know, in the barrels, I have been absolutely amazed at how little, in fact, I don't see any smoke influence showing up in our barrels at the moment. Fingers crossed, all that good stuff. And you know, we get a lot of industry folks in here, and whenever they do, I'm always bringing them over to the barrels. I said, put your nose in there and tell me what I'm not smelling. And so fingers crossed again that I think our 2020 vintage is going to make it through and be just fine. But yeah, it certainly was just that last kick in the teeth at the end of what was already a very challenging year.
Oh, it's just crazy, and I feel so badly because I'm now working on rosés for my rosé report, and you know, I've actually, you know, come across quite a few wines that I can't score because of smoke influence from Washington and Oregon. Maybe a little bit more Oregon so far than Washington, but certainly an issue both states, and it just breaks my heart, you know, honestly. You know, being on this side and, you know, tasting a wine that I have reviewed and enjoyed many times, and then just, you know, not being able to post a review and write about the wine because, you know, just because of the influence of smoke. And so I know a lot of people have really suffered from that, but I want to get into your wines, and we have 2 wines to taste. But first, if okay, I'd love to share your story. You have a very unique story coming from a completely different state. You both are originally from the Midwest, and I'd love to hear also about how you got into winemaking as well, Dave.
Sure. So, you know, I think, you know, I've always said that life doesn't go in a straight line, and we're certainly proof of that. Before I was a winemaker, I was an amateur winemaker and a lawyer and a French horn player. And at times at the same time and at times not. I played French horn for 20 years through college. I knew I couldn't really make a career at it. Just the odds are really against you. So I ended up going to law school after that. And for 10 years, I was doing corporate transactions work with big multinational public accounting firms, mergers and acquisitions, corporate transactions. And I did that for about 10 years, kind of on the road a lot, under high pressure a lot, you know, and while I worked with a lot of great people and some great firms, I started to just get to a point where burnout was coming. And I knew I kind of needed to make some changes in life. I mean, I was quickly becoming the person that nobody liked to be around. And this kind of started about the same time when my wife and I, Sarah, started to make wine just as a hobby. We've always loved wine, and the thing that we loved about it more than anything were sort of the experiences part of wine, where, you know, we were kinds of people that wanted to go to wineries, talk to the people that, you know, have gotten their hands dirty and spend all day, you know, on the craft and the toil and all that stuff that gives the wines their soul. And we love to hear the stories, and we love to learn, so those are the kinds of things we wanted to do. And when we started making wine, we viewed this as just kind of just a natural extension of what we were doing on the experiences side. So the first wines we ever made were about 15 years ago, and they were from kits in a box. Probably tons of people have done it. You know, and it's, you know, as I always say, you'll make a product that won't kill you. But honestly, what I love about the kits is that they're great introductions to the process, you know, because for most of us, we have not spent any time around something that's actively fermenting. So, you know, what am I supposed to smell and see and taste? And those are the sorts of, you know, kind of low risk sorts of introductions that you can get with the kits. But of course, you know, as time goes on, you want to step up your game. So we used to live back in Cincinnati, Ohio. My wife kind of grew up more or less in that area, lived a few different places, but pretty close to that area. And I was moved to that area between my junior and senior years of high school, and went to college in the area, went to law school in the area, and had my career in the area and lived there a long time. And you know, never at the time was really thinking about how am I going to do a winemaking career or anything. But, you know, as the whole winemaking thing started to catch on, you know, as most amateur winemakers will tell you, it's a hobby that gets out of control very quickly and starts to expand to take over more and more of the house. And, you know, I often say I'm probably the only guy whose hobby increased in square footage over time. You know, most guys, when, you know, they start having a family, it starts to get shoved into the back corner of the garage. But at least in my case, you know, I was making stuff that was decent enough. And so, you know, people enjoyed it, and they kept coming over and wanting to help, and, you know, started taking over more of the house. And then, you know, we started to take some more interesting vacations. We got to more wine-centered vacations, but, you know, we're really more interested in sort of the more offbeat destinations. And back in 2008, I mean, Oregon was just kind of starting to become what it is now. And that was one of the places that we visited, and we absolutely fell in love being here. And what was funny is back then, you know, these days there are about 600 wineries in the Willamette Valley. There were less than half of that back then. But there were more of these really small places that were owned and operated by folks that were very much like me, and folks that had been in some kind of technical careers, you know, engineers and lawyers and scientists, and, you know, folks that had been in these careers where there had been a lot of attention to detail and a lot of desire to practice the craft. And, you know, they weren't rewarded and fulfilled in what they were doing before, and they got into making wine. And that's when, you know, Sarah and I started to get a little bit more interested in maybe we could do this, And, you know, even then we thought after that trip, you know, we probably could do it, but we're a ways from that. Well, about a month after we got back from that trip, and we were in our mid-30s at the time, and Sarah's professional mentor, who at the time was aged 40, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And then over the next couple of months, you started to see her, you know, fade away, and she had 3 young children and a husband. And it was just a reminder, a kind of a kick in the butt for us that, you know what, life is really too short. And we made the decision at the end of that year that we were going to pursue it, with the understanding that, you know, we knew we could not go just from your basement to what we're doing now. And so we knew there had to be a transition period and sort of a real immersion process. So what I did was I quit my job, and for the next 3 years, I was the cellar hand for a little urban winery in Cincinnati, Hankey Winery, which has been featured multiple times in Wine Enthusiast as one of the top 10 urban wineries in the country. The gentleman I worked with, Joe Hankey, I mean, could not have been a better mentor. Joe is just, he's been there, he's done that. He makes 2,000 cases a year in the basement of a 100-year-old Victorian in a West Side neighborhood. It is, you talk about more with less. You know, it's one of the best lessons I learned that suits me very well with what I'm doing right now. Because as a very small place, you know, we don't have the resources to compete with the big, well-funded places. So, you know, what we do with a lot of grit, and love and elbow grease and really being very customer focused. So, Joe really didn't have to say much, just my observations of how he ran the ship was invaluable to what we did. And of course, in addition to all the technical things, the tools, techniques, and all of that, after 3 years with Joe, we started to feel like, okay, we're comfortable enough being able to operate without a safety net. And then we moved out to Newberg, Oregon in the summer of 2012. We started looking for property in earnest at that point, and we were very fortunate to find a 10-acre parcel. We networked into it before it went on the market. That was the benefit of having moved here. We didn't have to bid against California money. And so, yeah, we bought it at the end of 2012. We moved in 2013. What we bought was essentially 10 acres that included a house, a pole barn, and 9 acres covered in dead Christmas trees and blackberries. But it had all the advantages that you would want to see in a piece of vineyard property in Oregon. The soils, the beautiful Jory clay loam soil, the volcanic stuff, gorgeous red color and great nutrients. South-facing slope, this wonderful view looking south across the valley. It just needed some work. And so that was sort of our first year was learning how to drive a bulldozer and a backhoe and getting all that junk out of there. Our first vines went in 2014. And we've been rolling forward ever since. We opened the doors in 2015. When we started, we were purchasing all of our fruit. And now we're at a point where, we're only having to buy about half of the fruit that we're using. And over the next couple of years, we see being able to be almost 100% estate in the next 3 to 4 years. So it has really been a process with a lot of, I always say blood, sweat, and tears. I can vouch for each one of those things personally and literally. But it is so worth it. And, we've really been able to be very, very focused on giving people great experiences when they're here, making really good wine and, showing people a good time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I just love hearing this story. I know you've shared this several times with me, and I'd like to talk a little bit, back up a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about your inspirations prior to coming to the Willamette Valley, because you are one of the region's champion for this unusual wine, unusual varietal that you really don't see anywhere in the Northwest. We're talking Seyval Blanc, which we're not going to be tasting today, but I'd like for you to share a little bit about this experience, your winemaking experience with this varietal, and can you talk a little bit about the varietal itself for people at home that may not know anything about Seyval Blanc?
Absolutely. So Seyval Blanc is a grape that I have just loved for a long time. You will primarily find it grown in the mid-Atlantic states and in the Midwest, and it's a hybrid grape. It is the crossbreed between the traditional French grape Seyval and a Native American grape, which it's one of those that has a number on it, and it's not as important to the story as to know that it is the result of that crossbreed done up at Cornell years ago. And the reason that it was done is because when you're planting in these areas, you get these much colder winters than we tend to see, fortunately, out here on the West Coast. So for us, it's, for there, it's really about breeding in the cold tolerance for planting in those areas. Now, of course, in the crossbreed process, you're going to come up with something with a very unique flavor aroma profile. And it's such a fascinating grape because it has a lot of characteristics of Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, even though it is descended from neither. But it gives you a lot of options in how you make it. I've seen people that barrel ferment it like Chardonnay. My old mentor, Joe, used to do that. I prefer to steel ferment it myself. I'm not as big of a fan of barreling whites, but you have that option. And it's a grape that gives you very distinctive differences between nose and palate. So a lot of times, like when I'm presenting that wine here, I'm always making sure to go through an introduction because it can be kind of jarring for a lot of folks. There's a very earthy nose to Seyval, and regardless of whether that's grown here, there, anywhere, that's a pure characteristic of that grape. It's very earthy, almost at times kind of very diesel-y. but the taste is completely different. There's a limeness. It's very citrusy. There's a lime to it, and a lemon lime type of character, which I absolutely love and my customers really love. But it is one of those things where I have to talk folks through that cognitive dissonance between the smell and the taste. And then kind of once you get used to it, you start to realize, wow, this is an amazing grape that's so versatile. You can use it in so many ways. I've always said this is the best fish taco wine you're going to find. But it goes beautifully in so many ways. And what we found is here in Oregon, it grows extraordinarily well. The deer love it, unfortunately. One of our issues with trying to get it is to keep the deer away from it. But it was something, it was something that I wanted to introduce here in the Valley. There is one other grower in Oregon that has some. There's about an acre down at Girardet down in Roseburg. But, one of the things we wanted to do just sort of strategically as we opened our place up was we wanted to have some grape plantings that other people just didn't have. I mean, the reality is that when you have so many other wineries, having Pinot is awesome, but, you talk to your customers and they will say, it's nice that I can come to your place in the middle of a day of drinking so much Pinot and so much Chardonnay, and I can get something that's different. And, we can get an experience that is something that other people don't have, So, we kind of can play very well into that, and so that Seyval was sort of our first venture into this concept of saying, we don't need massive plantings of this, a half acre here, a half acre there, but have some things in our lineup that other folks, won't have and can't find an answer for. So, and it makes it a lot more fun for us. It makes it a lot more fun for the customers. And then you like I say, you kind of get this great interplay, and it just shows, hey, Oregon, we're capable of growing these other types of grapes, give our customers a lot more variety to their experience. It's just a question of going in there and doing it.
Yeah. Well, I know for my palate, I'm far from an expert on the varietal. I maybe have tried Seyval Blanc, one or two other times in my entire life. So I was really excited when you wanted to introduce this wine. I know that it was a meaningful wine to you. Want to say that you won a really big wine competition with this making a wine from this grape. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. One of the reasons that we felt like we could go professional eventually is that back in 2011, after 3 years of working with my mentor, I won 2 national amateur winemaking competitions, and one of them was with the Seyval Blanc, which kind of surprised me in a lot of ways because I never really thought that a white wine would take best in show in a competition, but it just shows that, sometimes things just come together and it works out. But I've been very, very happy, with how that grape is and really how it's been received here. I remember initially when we were talking to some of the old pro seasoned veterans here in the Valley about doing it. Let's just say that we got some sideways looks and a few people really mumbled at us, but we really felt that the future of the Valley has to be about making some diversity and bringing in some grapes that are going to really broaden the horizons of what we can do here. We have the capabilities to do it, and I think the best thing about small wineries like us is we can be the ones that sort of lead the charge on a lot of this experiment. I mean, it's not experimental for me, but it's experimental for the Valley, this particular grape. I mean, we have the ability to kind of be the test subjects to sort of bring these things online and to introduce, and who knows, what inspiration might come from that. But it's been fun the last couple of years to kind of see some different types of grapes starting to take off here and, getting some of that variety. I think it's only going to help the Valley to grow more, and I think it's only going to help more people to enjoy their experiences when they're down here.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Oregon, it's Oregon Wine Month, and we're celebrating everything Oregon. So it's not just Oregon Pinot Noir, right? So world bubbles made in Oregon. You make a really nice Pinot Blanc as well, Seyval Blanc, which people, probably if they haven't come to your winery and they're from the Northwest, they've never had. I mean, this is all part of what makes Oregon so great. It's not just having Oregon Pinot Noir, but all the other fruits that come from this incredible place.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I tell folks a lot of times, if you haven't heard of some of these grapes that I'm using, that's okay. I don't expect you to have, but that gives us the opportunity to kind of to walk folks through it, to be the introduction. Certainly rather than just throwing it in a store shelf and trying to find it that way. You really can kind of start to build. You start to build the demand and stuff, and like I say, just give folks some new looks, and you just see their eyes get bigger when they start realizing, wow, there is this bigger world out there, and just kind of a question of finding it.
Yeah. Well, we have two wines that we're going to taste today, and I'm assuming you want to start with the Rosé, the 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that'll work. That'll work. So the
Prelude here. It's 100% Pinot Noir, and I'd love to hear more about this wine, the winemaking behind it.
Exactly. So what I have certain beliefs about kind of what I want these wines to accomplish, and we can say that about every single wine in my lineup. When folks are here, one of the first things when I'm presenting the wine is I'll talk through, here's what I want to accomplish with this particular wine. So in this case, with Rosé, see, I am of the belief that Rosé should be, when you think of Rosé, so many people will say it's a summer wine. Well, okay, yes, primarily I'd agree with that. But, when I think of what summers are like for me, it's about cookouts and campfires and, having food with your wine. And for a lot of the rosés that I taste here in the Willamette Valley, they tend to be very, very light. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if what you want to make is something that's more versatile, and I always focus on versatility with all the wines that I do, then I want my rosé to have a little more body and a little more substance. So it's really just a question of how long I let that skin contact stay in contact with the juice. When I've asked a lot of other folks, how long they let that happen, I've heard everything from 2 hours to 12 hours. And what I've just learned is for what I want to do, my baseline starts at 24 hours. What I'll do, and whether that's 24 hours, 48 hours, or somewhere in between, that's just, I'm pulling samples every few hours. When I see the color and I get the flavors, that depth of I'm looking for, I'm good to go. At that point, we'll siphon off the juice. We'll do a light press on the skins, so I'll want to give it some of that body. But then the skins will go away for composting. They're not going to get thrown into my regular Pinot batches. At that point, we'll ferment in either plastic or steel or a combination of the two. I will then put them in neutral oak barrels for probably 5 to 6 months. Just depends on how soon it gets in there. I will put it through a full malolactic because I want it rounder. So what I get is something that has the body and the character. It does have acidity, but that acidity is much rounder than a lot of the rosés that I taste because I put it through the malolactic.
Yeah, I mean, this for me, I totally agree. I mean, I think rosé, is not just a summer wine. It's a wine that I enjoy year round. This is a bigger style, which is there's a bunch of comments I'd like to make. First of all, I love that you do the barrel ferment, kind of a la Big Table Farm. A wine that just gives texture and body when you do that. As a wine reviewer, is something that I really enjoy. You kind of methodical and really thought through that. The other thing I want to say is that it surprises me because your wines tend to be very Burgundian in style. In general, your lineup, when you taste your Pinot Noirs, they're very linear, they're earthy, they're not big Pinot Noirs. But this rosé is actually done in a little bigger style, which is really interesting. It's kind of a foil in your lineup, I guess, in some ways.
Well, the reds, my reds, I would probably agree with that. I tend to approach the whites and the rosé a little bit differently. Yeah. And to some way, it kind of the reds, it kind of lends itself to the more Burgundian style. I can tell you, as I said, for me, I really ask myself, what is going to make this wine the most versatile I can make it? Yeah. How, so we were talking about the rosé a minute ago, right? This is a rosé that you can have at Thanksgiving dinner every bit as good as it will go for poolside barbecue and just sitting on the porch at the end of a long, hot day. You have a lot of options, so in that case, and it's always, for me, the challenge every year becomes that balance between bringing the acidity, bringing enough body, but not overly so. You know, there's that line that you walk a little bit every year, and as long as you don't cross the line, you're good. How close can I get to that line each year without just, you know, jumping right over it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really tasty stuff. Talk a little bit about the fruit source and also what kind of flavors that you try to impart in this wine.
So the fruit source for this is our estate vineyard. We've been doing an estate Pinot since 2017, and we will always be doing an estate Rosé going forward. 2019 was actually the first year, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, where our fruit started, where our vines were then old enough to start to make actual estate Pinot from. But with this one, what I'm trying to do is kind of bring we're trying to bring the strawberry, cherry, and then there's, you know, because of the clone mix in here, we've got, it's about half Pommard and half 667 clones. And what we found here on our property is that the 667 clones bring a whole lot of watermelon, particularly when it's very young. And then it's, interestingly, as it gets a little older, the watermelon becomes more of a background note to the cherry and the strawberry that kind of predominates through it. So a lot of the red fruit characters you will taste. And harvest wise, by the way, I'm picking at the exact same time on Rosé that I'm picking everything else. I'm not doing an early pick for Rosé.
Wow. Okay.
We're so small that there really isn't, I mean, just it doesn't really make any sense to try to do a separate pick. So what we do is I try to figure out, you know, okay, how much Rosé do I want to make in a given year? And kind of backwards from there say, all right, I'm going to need a certain amount of fruit in terms of weight to accomplish that. And then it's just when we harvest, we separate certain bins are going to go for Rosé and certain bins are going to go for regular Pinot, and that's it. You know, it's when you're a small operation like ours, it is trying to keep things as simple as you possibly can. Right. And so when you start adding different picks and all those, it really starts to complicate things. So trying to keep it as simple as we can is really where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah, that makes sense. I noticed, you know, over the years, one thing I like about this wine, you know, it's consistently been one of my top wines on my Pacific Northwest Rosé report. And the added dimension in this wine, I really like the wild mushroom kind of peat moss character that you get in obviously a lot of Willamette Valley Pinot Noirs, especially cooler vintage Willamette Valley Pinot Noirs. I'm curious, you know, in terms of clonal selection, do you find that you get those earthy notes from the Pommard as you would with, you know, a lot of times with the regular Pinot bottlings, or is that from something else?
So far from what I've seen, it seems to come primarily from the Pommard. I'll throw in the caveat here that with our vineyard, it's still so young that we're learning this, and it is developing sort of all the time. You know, I tell people that there's this, you know, you can almost kind of graph the quality of the vineyard, and we're kind of hit that point where every additional year you start to see just these exponential jumps in the quality just coming from that age. And so it's developing characters that we're still learning about all the time. There have been times when I thought that earthiness you're describing seems to predominate a little bit more. And as you said, I think it's a little bit more in years that maybe are a little cooler. So 2019, I think it seemed to come a little bit stronger in that, which is, I say it's neither good nor bad. It just kind of is. But I always say, you know, with a lot of this stuff, it comes down to those characteristics. Since they're things that we really can't control how it develops, they become those wonderful happy accidents in part of winemaking. So we just kind of start, it's sort of like being a parent in a lot of ways. You know, you have influence over things, but no control. So as these things develop, you kind of look just the way you look at your kids and say, oh, you know, that's great. You know, they've developed these really neat, you know, characteristics and personalities. And so, you know, like I said, we're learning this sort of in real time the way our customers are, you know, as they're tasting the wines.
Yeah, beautiful rosé, man. Well, we have another wine that I'd like you to introduce. It's a 19, so a brand new wine. This hasn't been released, right?
Well, it's being released now to our wine club members.
Okay.
So what we said, now this is one where normally, you know, for a red wine, my preference would be to release this in the fall. But since our customers have been beating our doors down to try to get the first Estate Pinot out of it, I just kind of said, all right, fine, we'll release this a little early. And I was a little concerned initially because I was like, I don't know, releasing a 19 now, it's going to be a baby, and we knew it was going to be a baby, but is this thing going to show well enough to be able to really show people where it's headed? And I've been very, very pleased with it to this point, because, you know, I will still recommend holding on to it for a year, but it is showing you're getting that red dirt, you know, that Jory characteristic in here big time. And the fruit, and especially being a 19 where it was a little bit of a cooler year and wasn't sure, but I've been thrilled to see just the roundness that I'm getting. You know, when I talk about my Pinots, I tend to describe them not as much in terms of flavors, because I always think flavor is such an individual thing that people are tasting. I kind of focus on the shape of the wine as I put it together. So, you know, for example, I make one wine that rolls like a wave across your palate. I make one that's more like fireworks. The way Jupiter has shown up, I call it more like going off a water ski jump. The clonal makeup here is about half Pommard and half 667. So neither of those are big on the front palate, but it starts to build in the middle. And when the 667 kicks in on the back palate, it builds all through the finish. And then it carries you kind of as you're jumping off that jump and through the air for a little while, and just kind of a nice finish at the end of the arc.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with this wine. It's very youthful. I love the feeling of weight mid palate. It's already feel like it's very round and generous. Talk a little bit about 2019, a different year. Obviously, we had this huge run of warm vintages, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Just for a lot of winemakers, almost ideal growing seasons. A lot easier to make Pinot Noir than 19. Where we had a very difficult harvest situation in particular.
Right. And, you know, it's always interesting, you know, you get the question, you know, oh, was this a good vintage? And, you know, I always say that every vintage out here is a good vintage. It just depends on what your preferences are. For me, I'm kind of like you, Owen. I'm more for the classic, the elegance of some of those cooler vintages where, you know, sometimes it takes a couple of years for things to open up and develop. 19 was kind of getting back to a really, you know, kind of the more classic Oregon vintage. You know, we had some warm days, certainly, but overall it was cooler. We saw a lot more rain than we normally do, especially in August, and then very much into September. You know, ripening kind of really stopped as we got into that second week of September. You know, we picked when we normally do, which was at the end of September and early October, but you know, really by that time, you know, we kind of seen about the sort of ripening that we were going to have by earlier. So in general, you know, we're going to expect to see a lighter vintage. Notwithstanding, this particular wine has a lot more roundness than I had expected, particularly at this point in its development. So it's going to be interesting to start to see the 19s as they show up. But, you know, there's always stories with every vintage, and the one story I'll always have is that this particular year was the first time that we did all of our crush here on site at the winery. When we started out, we were so small. We were making wine at a shared facility until we kind of had enough volume to be able to justify putting the investment in. And so we have this new building and all this new equipment, and we're really excited. We get into harvest, and our pretty much every day of harvest, it was about 45 degrees and drizzle and rain. And you talk about just miserable for all of our volunteers that were coming up to help us do the fruit sorting. That was just an absolute mess. You know, and so the funny thing is for that year, my wife always makes, she always goes and creates these gifts to give to the people that are up for our harvest crew. So for that particular year, she made T-shirts. And short sleeve T-shirts. So, you know, what are you going to do? And then in 2020, the one good thing about 2020 was that it was much warmer at harvest, pretty much perfect, 60 degrees, sunny. She had wool hats.
That sounds about right, you know. But
Yeah.
Sarah's got a good sense of humor, so.
Yeah, she has a way of predicting what's going to happen, and I apparently now this is the secret. We just need to make sure that we have like parkas and kind of anything cool weather ready to go right at harvest. But you know, it was the 19 harvest. It was challenging. It was also challenging in the winery itself. You know, and this happens sometimes. We had pHs in the wines that were a little bit higher than normal, so everything took a little bit longer than it normally does. But you know what I've been very happy with are the flavors coming out of there. You know, we're seeing things that are a little bit more acid focused, which for more of a traditionalist is a good thing. And it's really also going to, as you said, be able to give us some counterbalances between those earlier vintages. You know, a lot of times what I love to be able to do when folks are here is to pour wines from these two different vintages so that we can talk to folks about how weather means so much when you're making wine between a warm vintage and a cooler vintage. And this really gives us that opportunity to start doing that again. So I'm excited to bring, the rest of the Pinots will come out later in the year, but this one at least kind of gives us that opportunity to have these conversations and then to show off how our vineyard is matured.
Yeah, really banging new wine. I'm so thrilled for you guys to have this estate vineyard now. I know been kind of chomping at the bit to have your own fruit and fruit source. And you have this really great terroir that you haven't been able to showcase until recently. So I just imagine it's, coming from your corporate job in Cincinnati now to have your, be able to make basically wine off of your land. That's a really great site. It's got to be so gratifying for you guys.
It's sort of amazing, when we look back we have a bunch of pictures, of course, of the land when we started out. And when you look back at that and you compare it to where we are now, I mean, it's unrecognizable practically. And it's also funny because the land was in such awful shape that, the neighbors were so furious at the people that used to own our place from the neglect. And we still, even today, we will have people that will like drive by and will come up and just say, we wanted to just say thank you for making this place look so much better. And it's really great to hear. But then like you said, when you literally start to see the payoff of all of that work that we put into this for years and years, we all know those first few years, you're not seeing anything and you're going on faith that all this is going to pay benefits down the line. And now we're starting to see it. And also to hear that our customers are excited and people like you are excited about it. It is so gratifying, and it's just going to get better and better because we're going to keep learning that, and we get to kind of share that with folks that are in. We get to say, hey, here's what we learned this year, and just kind of talk about how that's developed and what we're seeing going forward. And yeah, it's such a relief to have gotten to this point, but I think this is really where, on our side, where the fun really can begin.
Yeah, well, cheers to that, man. Thank you so much for meeting up with me virtually. I can't wait to come visit and chat in person and taste. I always love visiting your winery. It's such a beautiful part of the Willamette Valley. Really hope I get a chance to do that very soon.
Well, I hope so too, because we miss you and your better half in Lafitte. So we'd love to see you soon.
We would love that. All right, man. Well, thanks so much for your time today. And for those at home, if you've never had these wines, go check them out online. The Bells Up, what's the website?
Bells Up Winery, all one word.com.
Okay, bellsupwinery.com. Small boutique producer, really beautiful new rosé, great Pinot Noir. Go check them out. Dave, thanks for your time, man, and happy Oregon Wine Month.
Thanks to you too, Owen. Thank you so much for hanging with us through the years. You've really seen it when it was practically nothing. So I can't thank you enough for being there and rooting us on and for giving us this opportunity to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. And hope to see you soon.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you so much. Love to hear from you.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.